The projector coughed to life behind the curtain, a hot, insectile whir that vibrated up through the floorboards into my shoes. Film light bled through the velvet seam like a sunrise through a rifle slit, pale and merciless. I steadied my breath, palms flat against the cool metal of the lighting truss. The navy fabric of my suit held the day's starch like a shield. It smelled faintly of steam and lavender, the polite scent of a war I hadn't yet named out loud. "Live in 5," a stagehand whispered, headset crackling. His breath carried coffee and nerves. I nodded, though the part of me that needed reassurance was decades old and long out of reach. Out front, the theater was a hive. Shoulders and dress blues, polished shoes, the low rustle of programs folding like birds. I couldn't see the whole audience from my slit of backstage darkness, but I didn't need to. I saw the only face that had ever been the measure. General Richard Cole, front row center, spine straight as a flagpole, the Medal of Honor catching the house lights and throwing them back at the screen in cold, clean glints. The metal had a smell in my memory, brass polish and old leather, because that was the air I'd grown up breathing. The documentary title burned onto the screen in white serif letters: Operation Valiant, The Untold Story. My name followed in smaller type: Dr. Madison Cole, historian, daughter, witness. The crowd murmured. I could hear the damped cough of a camera shutter, the zip of a pen across a reporter's notebook. My friend Anna, 2 rows behind my father, lifted her press badge to her chest as if it were a talisman. Then the footage began. Not the sanitized reel the nation had married to its conscience, but the reel that woke me nights with the smell of scorched tin roofs and wet earth. The light shifted from clean theater white to the hungry orange of fire. Villages burned across the screen like maps being erased. Children ran. Women clutched bundles that were not even bodies yet. Orders ricocheted over radio channels, clipped and certain. The grammar of men who believed that tone could absolve consequence. Adjust coordinates. Confirm. Confirmed. Execute. And then, his voice. Familiar as my own heartbeat. Impossible as a ghost answering by name. Erase the footage. They'll never know. It wasn't a shout. It didn't need to be. Authority rarely raises its voice, it just sharpens it. I felt my mouth go dry. 27. I had counted them so many times, my lips knew the shape of the number even when I didn't speak. 27 people who had never seen our flag except as heat and thunder. 27 shadows that kept walking with me through hallways where the walls were lined with framed citations and folded triangles of cloth. There was a collective intake of breath, a soft vacuum that pulled the room smaller. A veteran's cane tapped once against the floor. Somewhere, a woman's bracelet slid against the arm of her chair with the faint sound of a wind chime trying not to ring. My father stood. The metal shifted against his chest with a tiny, traitorous clink. "Turn it off!" he barked. The command hit the air like a door slamming in a house you thought was empty. Heads snapped toward him, then toward the screen, then back to him, as if the crowd could not choose which theater to believe. The man they had saluted for 15 years, or the light now indicting him in front of them. The projector kept going. Film light doesn't have ears. He took a step into the aisle, hand lifted, palm forward. The same gesture he'd used to stop me as a child when my questions arrived, before he was ready to hear them. "Enough," he said. 2 syllables, steel-edged. The ushers didn't move. No one did. I slipped a fraction closer to the curtain, the rough nap dragging across my knuckles. I could feel my pulse in the pads of my fingers. Anna's gaze found the wings, and for a second, we were 9 again, crouched under my father's study desk, tracing the raised lettering on an old campaign map, whispering promises neither of us understood. We'll tell it right when it's our turn. On screen, the camera shook as the drone banked. The audio popped, adjusted, settled. The heat bloom washed a field white. Then, in the hiss that followed, came the line that had broken the lock on my own throat months ago in a Pentagon sub-basement. "We log this under Valiant. Copy?" A beat. "Copy." The house gasped. An animal sound, not a social one. You can hear the difference. Social gasps check the room to see if it's safe to be shocked. Animal gasps forget there's a room at all. My father turned halfway looking for an ally and finding a sea of faces that weren't on his payroll anymore. The Medal of Honor flashed again, hard light off hard metal, a star flaring uselessly in a storm. For one slivered instant, the blue ribbon looked like a bruise. I remembered the first time I'd held that medal between my palms. I'd been 6. It had been heavy, heavier than a story, heavier than a lie. He'd put it in my hands and said, "Feel it, Maddie. That's what honor weighs." Backstage, the floor felt steady, but the world did not. The stagehand at my elbow whispered, "Do we cut?" His headset crackled like frost. "No," I said. My voice came out low, level. "We let it play." He glanced at me, eyes wide, then nodded. Sometimes permission is a kind of freedom. Sometimes it's a sentence. Tonight, it was both. The film moved into the narration, the part I'd written in a voice I barely recognized as mine, because for the first time it didn't sound like his. I did not plead. I did not accuse. I named dates, coordinates, chain of command. A black box recovered from a footlocker in a garage 6 states away. A radio log Colonel James Everett had kept because guilt is heavier than orders, too. On cue, the lights in the theater dipped a shade darker. The room grew intimate with its own discomfort. The smell of warmed dust rose from the projector housing and mingled with the powdery sweetness of the velvet seats, theater, and archive, making a truce over the heads of the living. My father took another step down the aisle. An usher placed his palm, gentle, firm, just off the general's sleeve, not touching exactly, but occupying the space where a touch would have gone. My father stopped. For the first time in my life, he obeyed a gesture that wasn't his. The last minutes arrived. The recovered audio filled the speakers with a thin, almost papery authority, the way truth sometimes sounds when it has to travel too far to be heard. Erase it. No one needs to know. The line echoed inside the theater's plaster like a trapped bird. The projector's shutter clattered once, then twice. Mechanical heartbeat, unwavering. The screen went black. The house lights rose slow, respectful, as if afraid of what they would reveal. Silence. Then the scrape of my father's shoe against the carpet as he pivoted to face the crowd. He had never learned how to look small. The medal lay flat now, lightless. His eyes found me in the wings. He didn't blink. "You ruined me," he said. 4 words, not loud, not soft. A verdict, not a plea. I stepped out from the curtain into the raw wash of light. The warmth hit my face, a clean burn. I could see the film dust spiraling in the beam between us like ash that had learned to dance. "No, Dad," I said. "You did." Somewhere high in the balcony, a program fell and slapped against a knee. The room didn't move. It didn't have to. The movement had already happened. In them, in me, in the story we'd all carried without ever checking who had written it. A veteran in the 3rd row set his cap on his knees, hands pressed flat to the brim until his knuckles went bloodless. He looked toward the doors, then back to the screen, then lowered his head. Not a prayer, a reckoning. I heard the stagehand swallow. I felt the bite of the earpiece against my skin, the tiny plastic ridge digging into the curve where my jaw met my neck. I thought of the medal again, the way it had warmed in my hands when I was a child, the way he'd said, "Feel it." That's what honor weighs. I thought of the black box drive in my bag, heavy in a different language. 2 emblems, 2 gravities. One would have to outlast the other. A camera light in the back clicked from red to green. Live. Again. The country breathing against the glass. I could almost taste the tin of studio lights on the air, that metallic tang that always reminded me of biting my lip to keep from speaking. I lifted my chin. The film light on my skin felt like noon in a place that had never seen a clock. In the 1st row, the ribbon on my father's chest trembled once, as if even silk could understand consequence. Behind me, Anna's phone vibrated. She didn't look at it. She was watching my father, eyes steady, as if measuring how long it takes a statue to remember it's a man. "Dr. Cole," someone called from the press row, voice careful, almost tender. "Do you have a statement for the nation?" I kept my gaze on the general who had named my childhood, my discipline, my dictionaries. The man who had taught me to salute before I learned to say please. "I do," I said, and felt the sentence stand up inside me. The medal didn't move. The light did. I had been raised to believe film was for heroes, and light was for celebration. That night, I learned light could be a scalpel and film could be a mirror. The ushers opened the doors. Cool air slid down the aisles, raising goose flesh across my wrists. The audience didn't rise. Not yet. They were still deciding what their legs owed their eyes. I let the quiet hold. Truth doesn't rush. It waits where you can see it. And I wasn't going anywhere. I was a soldier's daughter before I could spell honor. Mornings in our house began with the soft tick of a regulator clock and the sharper clink of metal. My father setting his Medal of Honor just so on a velvet stand, as if even air could smear it. Light pooled through the kitchen blinds in hard stripes, and dust motes swam in it like a parade that refused to end. Back straight, he would say, never looking up. History doesn't slouch. By the time I was 5, I knew the smell of brasso and saddle soap better than crayons. He taught me posture the way other fathers taught bike riding. Hands at my shoulders like reins, pacing me down the hall, the floorboards creaking in a steady cadence that made our hallway sound like a drill yard. When I wobbled, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Authority in our house was the quiet thing that made everything else noisy. We lived in a museum curated to his reflection. Framed commendations lined the hallway, each one perfectly level. Folded flags sat under glass like sleeping birds. In the evenings, the dim lamp in his study cast the medals on the wall into shallow constellations. If I stood in the doorway long enough, the reflected pinpricks of light braided into stories he never told. Stories I was supposed to infer, not ask about. Asking had a sound in our house. Chairs stilled, a fork paused just above a plate. My mother's breath catching the way a film reel catches when someone's hand shakes at the crank. At school assemblies, it was the microphone that taught me how a room bows. The gym would hum with chatter until he stepped up and cleared his throat. The speakers popped. The bleachers became pews. I remember the silk whisper of the curtain as he passed behind it, the stagehand whispering, "He's early," as if that were a kind of holiness. He always began with the same line. "We don't make mistakes, Maddie. We make history." He'd smile toward where he knew I sat, knees together, hands folded, trying to look old enough to belong to the word we. Afterward, the principal pressed a hand to his forearm and called him the face of American heroism, and someone would hand him a portable spotlight at a donor dinner to warm the room. He didn't warm it, he hardened it. The way film hardens under a lamp in a dark room, I learned early that light can either reveal or burn. It depends on who is holding it and how long they make you stand there. At home, my mother, Evelyn, translated everything into charity. She ran a veterans foundation that threw perfect galas with perfect centerpieces and perfectly framed photographs of men with careful smiles. She arranged starched tablecloths like field dressings and spoke about healing in a voice that never trembled. When the dishwasher hummed and the stemware chimed against its racks, she'd stand in the kitchen doorway drying her hands and watching us, as if waiting to see who would be brave enough to break something and then brave enough to admit it. "Smile," my father would say before every photograph. One word. Command tone. I learned the difference between a smile that shows teeth and a smile that shows loyalty. Only one of them counted. If there were whispers about classified missions, they entered our house as drafts under doors. Felt, not discussed. Sometimes a reporter's voice on the evening news would rise a half step when Operation Valiant came up, and my father would reach for the remote with 2 fingers like tweezers and lower the volume exactly 2 notches. My mother refilled his glass. I traced the emboss on a folded flag with my thumb until the pad of it felt numb. When I said I wanted to study history, he mistook the noun for a pledge. He set his hand on my shoulder, warm, heavy, unmistakably proud. "You'll tell our story," he said, and the sentence draped over me like a banner I hadn't agreed to carry. The next day, he brought home a banker's box of clippings, transcripts, a photocopy of his citation. "Source material," he said, eyes bright. "Start with this." The citation had language like parchment and trumpet calls. Conspicuous gallantry, intrepidity, words that taste like coins when you hold them too long in your mouth. I read it out loud to myself until the syllables went flat. In the margin, in pencil, someone had written a date that didn't match the public one. When I turned to ask about it, he was in the study with the door half closed. the desk lamp thrown low like a cone of interrogation light. Dates move, he said without looking up. Heroes don't. He pinned the medal to my palm once. More ceremony than generosity. It was cold at first, then warmed to my skin until I felt claimed by it. Feel that, he murmured. That's what honor weighs. I nodded because there are only two answers to that tone: agreement or exile. I was still too young for exile. Even the quiet had a training schedule. Dinner at 1900, lights out at 2200, questions on Sundays, but only rhetorical ones raised from a pulpit. On Saturday mornings, he cleaned the metal, and I learned to stand still. The cloth made a small, persistent whisper against brass, a sound like someone erasing a sentence they don't want to read again. When he was finished, he held it to the lamp and tilted it left, then right, watching for streaks. History needs winners, he'd say, as if he were teaching me Latin declensions. Winners don't smear. I practiced absorbing. The refrigerator's low motor filled the pauses when I might have asked why some names never appeared in the speeches. The dryer thumped in the garage while my mother ironed a crease sharp enough to cut your hand if you slid against it. In the living room, the glass over the folded flags collected fingerprints. I cleaned them with the corner of my shirt when no one watched, the cotton catching and squeaking against the smooth. The film light shimmer that bounced off the frames made halos on the ceiling. I noticed that the house darkened when Valiant came up. Lamps dimmed. My father's voice dropped a register, and my mother's eyes slid to the hallway as if to check the distance to the door. If the phone rang during those moments, it rang too loudly. If the dishwasher drained, it was too sudden. If my own breath snagged, it sounded like insubordination. Some missions are for national security, he would say. You don't need to carry what I carry. But weight has its own physics. It finds you, it learns your pockets. By the time I reached the university lab, I'd internalized his cadence so thoroughly that my first lectures sounded like his speeches stripped of adjectives. I hated that about myself. So I learned to add footnotes where he put flourish. I learned to let silence be an archive instead of a leash. When a professor projected a battle map and the room's projector fans spun up with that familiar moth-wing buzz, I sat straighter without meaning to. Light on wall, hum in the air, a room falling into organized attention. My nervous system knew those cues like a hymn. In the lab, truth didn't have metals, but it had metadata. It had the soft whine of a server waking. It had the slick weight of an encrypted drive in a palm used to brass. On the night I stayed late and the cleaning crew's dolly squeaked down the corridor like a guilty conscience, I realized I had chosen a profession that rhymed with my father's without repeating it. I wasn't supposed to make myth. I was supposed to measure it. He attended my first conference presentation and sat in the front row in civvies, legs wide, arms crossed, as if daring peer review to try something. Afterward, he kissed my forehead and said into my hair, "Proud of you." It smelled like cologne and old wool. Then, in the car, looking out the windshield as if the road were the only witness he trusted, he added, "Keep it clean, Maddie. Our story doesn't need footnotes." "Truth does," I said, too softly for the dashboard to record. At home that night, my mother ironed a table runner for a gala, while the late news murmured in the background about a new release of declassified files. The iron hissed when it hit a damp spot. She lifted it and set it down like a heartbeat. "Your father looks tired," she said, eyes on the fabric. "He needs you to make this easier." "By making it simpler?" I asked. "By understanding what to leave out." The iron kissed cloth again. Steam rose. The house smelled like starch and something singed. There were photographs from Valiant I wasn't allowed to catalog. Operationally sensitive. We pretended sensitivity was a synonym for care, not secrecy. In my program, care meant including what hurt. In my house, it meant shielding the hurt from the light until it went brittle and called itself strength. Once, when I was 16, I asked if anyone had ever said no to him. He laughed, an honest sound I rarely got to hear. "Everyone says no," he said, "until I explain why it's yes." I kept that in my pocket alongside a smooth stone from Arlington and a folded scrap from his citation. Objects anchor you when words start trying to float off into slogans. The stone was cool when everything else burned. The scrap cut if I pressed too hard. I don't know when I understood that my father's emblem and mine were different metals. His was visible, heavy, and engineered to be pinned under lights. Mine fit inside a palm and asked to be opened in the dark. He wanted film light that crowned. I wanted film light that revealed. When I told him I'd be working in the Pentagon archives for a semester fellowship, he gripped my shoulders and squeezed. Pride, claim, warning. You'll see what we protected, he said. You'll see why. In the empty elevator after, the fluorescent tube above me buzzed. I watched our reflections in the doors blur as the floor numbers ticked. For a second, we looked like a double exposure. My face across his across mine. Both of us washed in that too honest white that flattens everything into the same shade unless you move. A week later, I was at my desk in the university lab when an email pinged. Congratulations. Access approved. The monitor glow threw a soft square onto my hands. My fingers looked like they belonged to someone who had been typing for a very long time. I closed my eyes. I could hear our kitchen clock from every house we'd ever lived in. I could hear the cloth on brass. I could hear my mother's iron. I could hear the hush a room makes when a microphone warms and a man begins to write a nation out loud. I opened my eyes and hit reply. I accept. I didn't know I had just chosen a corridor where the air smelled like cold plastic and secret paper, where the projector bulbs were checked by men who did not smile, where the light fell in long, hard lanes across tables that had seen more redactions than dinners. I didn't know that the hum of the archive fans would sound like an echo of my father's study lamp, or that the silence there would be the same noose and the same key. I didn't know, not yet, that the first time I'd hear his voice in that room, it would be faint, familiar, and speaking to a recorder instead of to me. But I knew this. I had been taught to hold the metal without dropping it. I had taught myself to hold the light without flinching. And sooner than anyone in our house was ready for, I would have to hold both at once and decide which one belonged on the wall and which one belonged in my hand. The archive's air was colder than the hallway, the kind of institutional chill that made paper feel like glass. I badged in, heard the soft double beep, the little electronic bow every door gave to authority, and crossed to a workstation beneath a flickering fluorescent. The bulb buzzed, then steadied, then buzzed again, a mechanical stutter I could feel in my teeth. I'd come to reconcile a minor discrepancy, a strike summary that refused to match its after-action report. Routine, I told myself. A typo gathering dust in the machine. My palms were dry on the keyboard. The keycaps had that faint, chalky texture of plastic that has learned too many names. Search, filter, drill down. A directory surfaced that shouldn't have existed for that operation set. Valiant Aug Arch Set 06. Nested inside, a subfolder misnamed with bureaucratic innocence. Cultural Site, Survey. I hovered, the cursor pulsing like a patient heartbeat. I opened it. File 1. AOI 17 QRF Cam 2 Move. File 2. AOI 17 QRF Odd Prime WAV File 3. Ghost Reg Ref. YE1. TCL, a script likely for metadata shims. File 4. Black Box Extraction Notes.pdf. The fans in the server cage picked up a note. I felt the vibration through the desk as if the building were leaning forward to listen. AOI 17 QRF Cam 2 Move was password locked. Not unusual. The override pane bloomed. I keyed the audit credential, thumb steady on the reader. The workstation recognized my pulse as if we were already conspiring. The video opened on a horizon I'd seen 100 times in declassified footage, and never once like this. A village path, etched in pale dust, heat shimmer bending fence lines, a convoy of figures moving in a long, careful thread. No weapons visible, no tactical spacing. The geometry of flight, not fight. A child ran 2 steps and was pulled back by a hand I couldn't see. Off-screen, a radio squelch stuttered. A voice said, "Confirm corridor status." The reply came from a timbre I'd heard through microphones and microphones and microphones since I could form a memory. "Corridor is gray. Proceed." My throat closed so fast the rest of me had to hold still to keep breathing. I scrubbed forward 30 seconds, then 1 frame, then 1 frame. Coordinates rolled in their corner like a prayer bead string. I matched them against my own notes. The refugee corridor designation blinked in my mind's overlay. The overlay my training gave me, The overlay he had trained me to respect. A second voice, cool, polished, the one everyone in Washington described as steady. Log this under Valiant, it said. Copy? The drone camera widened. A white bloom erased the center of the frame. When the flare eased, roofs were angles and smoke. I pressed my thumb into the edge of the desk until it hurt. I ran the metadata parser. The numbers didn't lie. They rarely do. We teach numbers to do a lot of tricks in my field, but not that one. The corridor had been civilian, flagged, protected. The entry that made it gray was time-stamped after the strike, a backfill, a paper bridge over a crater. The audio file waited like a hand I didn't want to take and knew I would. AOI 17 QRF odd prime, WAV opened clean. The archival hiss crackled, then settled into a frequency my bones recognized. Adjust coordinates. Confirm. Confirmed. Execute. A long, disciplined silence. Then, almost gentle. Erase the footage. They'll never know. The fluorescent above me chose that moment to flicker again, throwing a thin blade of shadow across my hands. I thought of the metal in its blue case on my father's study shelf, the way its star points carved their own light out of a room. I thought of the black box in my bag, the university's loaner drive, small, heavy, insisting on its own gravity. I copied the files. The external drive was cold when I lifted it, the brushed metal biting the lines in my palm. I labeled the folder with the only honesty I could fit into a file name without triggering a scan. Sup Annex. Support Annex. Words that open doors while hiding what they carry. I didn't notice the silence until the fans spooled down to a lower hum and I realized my ears had been bracing to hear footsteps. No one came. The archive keeps its own kind of mercy. It waits for you to make the choice yourself. On my way out, I paused by the microfilm cabinet, the old machine sleeping under its dust cover. I slid my fingers along the plastic edge. The cover rasped softly, a shroud over a lantern. Film light, metal light, two languages I could translate without a dictionary and still not agree with. I called him from the parking garage, the concrete sweating cold through my blouse. The call picked up in 2 rings, then compressed itself into his command tone, even in hello. Dad. Maddie, you're at work this late? I found something in the Valiant Ose. My voice surprised me. It wasn't shaking. It had the calm of a field surgeon who already knows what the wound is. A mislabeled corridor. A civilian convoy recorded as gray after the strike. Silence. Then the careful sound of a door closing on his end. The hush of carpet. Where did you see that? In the archive. His inhale was precise, measured. Delete it. The word scraped. I felt it in the bones of my fingers where the drive pressed. It's evidence. You think you found a scandal? His tone edged cool. You found what war looks like. 27 civilians I said. Saying the number out loud knocked something loose in my throat. I steadied it. We logged them as ghosts. Delete it, Maddie. That's an order. There it was. The sentence that used to end every argument. The one that had taught my muscles to obey before my mind could phrase its refusal. I looked at the drive, small and implacable, and I knew which emblem I was holding this time. I can't, I said. I won't. Static filled the space where his answer should have been. When he spoke again, the warmth was gone. You don't understand context. I understand consequence. The line clicked. Call ended. I stood with my back against the cinder block and let the chill climb my spine until it felt like resolve. I drove home with the radio off. Street lamps laid their measured light across the windshield and counted me city block by city block. At a red light, I opened the glove compartment, laid the drive inside, and closed it gently as if tucking in a child who had earned, finally, the right to sleep. My phone buzzed. Anna, I answered on speaker, fingers still resting on the glove door's seam. You sound like a person who just learned a new language, Bump, she said. It learned me, I said. She was quiet for a beat, then, come to the lab, now. In her office, The hum of external fans and the faint caramel smell of burnt dust from overworked power strips wrapped around us. She set a ceramic mug in my hand. The heat climbed my skin and made the drive's earlier cold feel like a memory I could mark on a calendar. Before. I slid the black box onto the desk. It clicked against the wood, a small, undeniable sound. Tell me, she said. I told her without adjectives. Dates, files, voices. I kept my father's name in my mouth without letting it become a plea. Anna's press badge lay beside her keyboard, lanyard curled like a sleeping thing. She didn't touch it. She touched the drive. We'll need secondary corroboration, she said. Chain of custody, a log, anything you can get that ties the voice to authorization. Colonel Everett, I said. The name tasted like a door opening in a hallway I'd been told was a wall. Anna's eyes flicked up. He'll talk? He carries weight, I said. He always did. We worked until the building's heating system kicked to its night cycle with a hollow boom that rolled through the ductwork like a distant drum. I backed up the files twice, 3 times. Local, off-site, a micro SD seated under a strip of tape inside my wallet where no one but a paranoid would look. Paranoia is just foresight that has paid its bills on time. When I finally turned out my apartment light, the city threw its own onto my ceiling in a soft grid. I lay there and watched it crawl. Somewhere my father was polishing a metal, cloth whispering in little circles that pretended to be prayer. Somewhere else, a projector bulb made the same small electrical burr it had made since Edison, waiting for a room to decide if it was about to be warmed or lit. I fell asleep with my hand on the edge of the desk where the microphone would sit on a different night. The wood was cool, the grain pressed faintly against my skin, a record of years I hadn't lived and would have to answer to anyway. In the morning, I woke to my mother's text. No words, just a photograph of a vase of white flowers on the dining table, light pouring through the window like a benediction. It was her way of asking me not to name the storm while the house was still standing. I dressed, slid the drive into my bag, and went to find a man who had left service with a spine full of secrets and a garage full of boxes he hadn't opened. The door to his life creaked on its hinges when he answered. The smell that came out was cardboard and old oil. Madison, he said. He hadn't called me that since I was 10. I need your logs, I said. All of them. He looked at my face a long time, then at the bag on my shoulder. You don't cross a man like your father. I already did. He stepped back, and the dark of the garage became a kind of afternoon. He reached behind a stack of winter tires and pulled out a small, heavy case I knew by its handle before he handed it to me. The latch snapped up with a sound I felt in my ribs. Inside, the black box waited, matte and stubborn, the twin of mine and older by a war. Guilt breaks in daylight, he said. You carry it long enough and it starts to sound like authority. Don't let it. I lifted the unit. Cold bit the lines of my fingers all over again. This one had a strip of masking tape across the top with 3 words in a block hand, do not erase. For the first time since the archive door beeped its little bow at me, I smiled. Not triumph. Recognition. Somewhere, once, someone had said no in a room that had never been told it could hear it. I tucked the box against my ribs. Its edges dug in. Weight. Proof. A new emblem that didn't require a podium to matter. Thank you, I said. Don't thank me, he answered. Make it count. When I stepped back into the morning, the sun had clawed its way through a seam in the cloud cover and dropped a bright strip across the sidewalk. I stood in it and let the light find my face. It wasn't warm. It was honest. That's when the path stopped being research and became a reckoning. By noon the next day, the denial arrived with a government stamp. A memo hit my inbox like a gavel. Ghost file. Erroneous metadata. No action required. The PDF smelled faintly of toner and heated plastic when I printed it. An imaginary scent, I knew, but my brain had always attached odors to lies I needed to remember. I held the page up to the window. Film light from the morning sun slid across the watermark and made it wink. A bureaucratic halo. I thought of the masking tape on Everett's box. Do not erase. One order built a myth. The other refused to bury it. Anna paced, her boots whispering over the lab's rubber mat. They'll kill it with paperwork. Then we'll resurrect it with proof. She glanced at the black boxes stacked like small coffins on her table. Chain of custody? Documented, I said it twice. We built our wall. The radio logs, the raw feed, the timestamp diffs, the original black box checksum. Every file was a rung on a ladder. We were climbing out of a hole someone else had named security. The servers hummed. The power strip snapped on and off as if clearing its throat. At dusk, I drove to the Cole estate. The front door opened before I knocked, as if the house had been listening at the peephole for my heartbeat. My mother stood there in stocking feet, a lipstick glass print on her water. The living room smelled like lemon oil and lilies, charity gala leftovers animated by grief. Madison, she said, my full name, when she wanted me to behave like one of her centerpieces. In the study? I asked. She flinched. Don't do this here. Truth lives here, I said. It has to. The study door was half shut, the brass knob cool under my palm. He sat at the desk, the metal case open beside his wrist. The desk lamp threw a hard cone, dust motes floating like a blizzard of ash refusing to land. He didn't look up. Ghost file, he said. Evidence, I said. Context. Consequence. His jaw ticked. You don't cross me, Maddie. I already did. He finally raised his eyes. The light cut a knife edge across his face. One side day, one side night. You'll destroy this family. I'll free it from the lie. He exhaled. One measured breath, same length as all the others he'd used to bend rooms. Get out. In the hall, my mother caught my sleeve, fingertips cold through linen. Please, she whispered. Let it end. It hasn't ended yet, I said. It started with a button press 15 years ago. Her grip loosened. The house settled, old wood popping in the AC like muffled applause for a performance none of us wanted to be in. Back at the lab, Anna had turned the place into a war room. Sticky notes covered a corkboard in a map of arrows and dates. She rolled toward me in her chair. We need a stage, she said. If they bury the report, we go wide. I tasted the air, coffee and hot circuitry. A documentary. Fast. We cut with sorrow, not fury. She nodded. They'll expect rage. We'll give them evidence. We rented an editing suite with carpet that trapped yesterday's conversations in its fibers. The room was a cave of screens. The color correction monitor glowed like a second sun. Its heat pricked my cheeks. I built the structure in silence, opening light, unspooled orders, a map laid over a prayer mat. Anna kept time, her pen tapping a soft metronome against the console. We drove out to see Everett again. His garage door groaned up, releasing a waft of dust and old rubber. He handed me a battered composition notebook, bound with a rubber band. I wrote things down when the radio went quiet, and he said, Guilt needs minutes. The pages smelled like basement and ink. His handwriting was a blocky exhale. At the back, a name I didn't expect. Underlined. Sergeant Helen Ward. A line beside it faint but legible. Tried to halt strike. Overruled. And beneath that, a ribbon of bile I could hear in his pen. Citation language reused. I closed the book. The paper was soft from years of handling, the edges feathery. Save that for the end, Everett said quietly. You'll only get one shot at the part they think is sacred. Thank you, I said. Don't thank me, he replied. Finish it. We built a vault. Anna's journalist friends fed us stadiums of silence, legal phrasing, contingency plans, the number of seconds you can run a voice sample before the fair use fights start to cannibalize your point. We chose to cut around the law like surgeons. Precise, sparing, leaving the tumor intact for everyone to see. At 2 a.m., the building's HVAC thudded and the vents breathed out a tired warmth that smelled like metal and dust. My eyes burned. I rubbed the bridge of my nose and saw the negative image of the metal when I blinked. Film light does that. It stamps shapes into you. The star floated in the dark behind my eyelids, bright and empty. At 4, a message pinged from a blocked number. You think you're clean? No sign-off. I put the phone face down and traced the microphone's rubber feet. Soft, steady. Anything can be steady if you decide to hold it that way. By morning, a packet slid under my apartment door. No return address. I snapped the string tie and pulled out a legal threat so neatly typeset it could have been scripture. Cease, desist, refrain. Silence was a parish with a rich liturgy. Anna read it, snorted once, then tucked it under the coffee machine like a coaster. They sent fear by courier. Retro. We booked the premiere with a theater whose owner had a son lost to a polite war. He shook my hand, his palm calloused, his eyes damp. "You tell it right," he said. "I'll keep the lights on." We tested the projector in an empty house. The fan spun up with that familiar wing buzz. Light ran its fingers across the dust. The screen bloomed white, then resolved into a field I had walked only in other people's boots. I stood in the beam, lifted both hands, and let it paint me. Warmth slid over my face, heavy at first, then bearable. I didn't flinch. Anna raised a brow, half smile. "You good?" "I've been standing here my whole life," I said. She stepped into the light with me, shoulder to shoulder. "What are we scared of?" "Not the truth," I said. "The after." We stood until the projectionist cleared his throat and we stepped out of the beam like swimmers leaving a lane. That afternoon, my mother called. The line carried a spoon clinking against china. Tea spun into bravery. "He's not sleeping," she said. "Every time he closes his eyes, he hears it." "So he's finally listening," I said. "You could still stop." I could stop breathing, too. She was quiet. "He told me to remind you." "Don't," I said, sharper than I meant to. "Don't carry his orders for him." Her breath hitched. "He built our lives on ashes," she said so softly I almost missed it. Then the click of a set-down receiver. The silence that follows a confession no one intended to give. Evening brought an unmarked sedan idling across from my building, engine a low purr under the cold. I watched from the window, fingers flattening the blind so hard the plastic cut into my skin. They wanted me to know I was interesting. They wanted me to flinch. I met their gaze through the glass and lifted my phone. The sedan drifted away, embarrassed. We finished the cut at dawn on a Tuesday. The last frame dissolved to black with a breath you could feel pass through the speakers. Release, not relief. Anna hit save. The fan's pitch changed, a small, triumphant whine. The smell of warm electronics curled around us like toast in a kitchen where no one had eaten yet. We uploaded to the broadcast server under a title plain as a ledger entry, Valiant Evidence Cut. No poetry, no bait. We didn't need hooks. We had a hook that had burned itself into the reel 15 years ago and refused to cool. I walked outside while it transferred. Winter air slapped my face clean. The morning had that spare blue light that makes edges honest. Across the street, a city worker salted the sidewalk. The rock hit concrete with a soft tick, tick, tick that sounded like a metronome warming up for a speech. My phone rang. "Everett." "It's done?" "It's done." "Then brace," he said. Truth falls like a building. The dust takes a while. Before the premiere, I stood in my kitchen, palms flat on the counter's cool stone, and tried to remember how to be a daughter who could go home after the lights came up. My hands shook. I closed them into fists until the tremor stopped. On the table, the metal case I'd borrowed for a pickup shot lay cracked half open. The blue ribbon slipped out and brushed the wood. Silk against maple made a whisper like two words. I couldn't hear which. I couldn't. I closed the lid. In the theater's wings that night, the curtain brushed my knuckles like a living thing. The projector coughed, then purred. Anna squeezed my shoulder, her fingers warm through the suit fabric. I could smell the room. Wool, perfume, old velvet, the faint ozone of lamps warming to truth. A text from my mother arrived as the house lights dimmed. "Whatever happens, you're still mine." The words put heat behind my eyes I didn't have time to manage. I swallowed and tasted copper. A beat later, a different text, unsentimental and correct. "Sound levels good?" From the projectionist. I lifted a thumb. He nodded, the gesture slicing the air sharp and clean. I took one step toward the slit in the curtain. The light spilled through it like a blade. Beyond it, the audience shifted in their seats, the sea drawing breath before a wave. The metal on my father's chest would reflect the first frame the way it had reflected every stage light of his life. For the first time, it would be reflecting something other than applause. I inhaled. The air was warm against my teeth. Ready? Anna whispered. As I'll ever be, I said. The projector shutter snapped open. We were past the point of orders. We were inside the point of no return. The theater breathed like an animal in a cage. Hot exhale, cold intake, the projector's fans sawing the air into ribbons of light. I felt the beam on my cheek before I stepped out. Film light has a weight when you've lived under it long enough. It settled on my skin like a hand that remembered where to press. Anna gave the projectionist a thumbs up. The shutters snapped open. White filled the screen, then color, then the first frame. A road like a scar, and heat boiling the edges of a village that had never learned our language for mercy. I stayed in the wings and let my voice carry from the track we'd laid. Me, not pleading, not raging, just naming. Dates like coordinates, coordinates like names. Names like doors opening in houses my father had locked. Grid 17, Quadrant Delta, my recorded voice said. Civilian corridor designation holds. Chairs creaked as people leaned forward. The house lights dimmed one notch further. Velvet swallowed sound. I could smell the baked dust lifting off the projector housing. An old electric warmth, the way childhood smelled in my father's study when the desk lamp bloomed over brass. On screen, a child ran. A hand caught him. Off screen, a voice squelched through. I knew the cadence without the clock. Confirm corridor status. Then his. I had braced for it. My body still flinched. Corridor is gray. Proceed. I watched the front row instead of the image. The Medal of Honor on his chest reflected a thin, steady pulse of light. Frame, frame, frame. Like the screen was trying to teach the medal a new story. His jaw set. The blue ribbon didn't move. The blast chewed the frame white. When the shape of the village returned, it did so as angles and ash. A veteran in the third row inhaled hard enough for the seat back to click. A woman's bracelet slid against a lacquered armrest with the delicate chime of a warning no one had heard in time. We cut to the radio log. Clean audio, no music, no sermon. Adjust coordinates. Confirmed. Execute. Silence. Erase the footage. They'll never know. The sentence hit the room and kept walking. It found the ceiling and echoed back smaller, like conscience does when it finally runs out of places to hide. My father stood. The metal clinked, just once, a tiny betrayal of its own gravity. Turn it off, he said. The projectionist didn't look up. The machine kept purring. Film light doesn't salute, it works. I stepped out from the curtain into the beam. Heat pricked my scalp. Dust hung in the light between us like a slow fall of snow that wouldn't melt. Anna's hand brushed my sleeve. The brief press of a human tether. And then she was gone. Back into the dark we'd agreed would be mine alone to leave. The documentary moved into the piece we'd saved for last. Colonel Everett's notebook, scanned and dated. His handwriting, blocky, ashamed, tight on the page. Sergeant Helen Ward, my voice said, attempted halt, overruled. A rustle moved through the room like tall grass realizing wind. The camera cut to a still. Ward in uniform, eyes level, jaw set the way a promise sets. Then the final card slid into place. 2 columns. My father's Medal of Honor citation on the left. Ward's recommendation memo on the right. The phrasing crawled down both like a mirror finally admitting itself. Conspicuous gallantry, intrepidity, above and beyond the call. No music. Just the whine of the projector and the dry swallow of 100 throats realizing what plagiarism can do to a flag. In the front row, my father didn't blink. I watched the moment the words recognized him back. We cut to black. Silence took the room, not polite, sacred. The kind that has to move carefully because the floor just shifted. I could feel the air on my teeth, cool and clean, as if the building had opened a window no one could see. The house lights came up slow. People looked at me, then at him, then at each other like they were trying to remember who had given them permission to believe both at once for so long. He turned in his seat to face me. The metal lay still, inert now, a star that had run out of sky. His voice didn't rise. It never needed to. You ruined me, he said. My mouth was dry. The beam still warmed my cheek. I kept my hands at my sides because I'd learned long ago that truth doesn't need choreography. No, Dad, I said. You did. The words slid into the light and sat down. They didn't echo. They didn't need to. They had the weight of a black box in a palm and the temperature of a lamp on brass. For a heartbeat, the room didn't breathe. Then a chair leg scraped. A veteran took off his cap and set it on his knees. A woman in dress blues closed her eyes the way you do when something stops pretending to be complicated. Somewhere behind me, I heard Anna's pen drop and strike the console with a tiny, decisive click. The sound of a period at the end of a sentence that had been running on for 15 years. My father's fingers touched the metal's edge. Barely the way a man touches a wound to confirm it's his. He stood. When he turned toward the aisle, the ribbon caught a seam of light and brightened for a second as if remembering what applause used to feel like. He didn't look back. The doors sighed shut behind him. Their seals kissed the jambs with the soft translational sound of a house learning a new language. I stepped out of the beam. The warmth left my face like a hand letting go. For a second, I missed it. Then I didn't. The audience remained seated, eyes forward. No applause, no chorus. Just the disciplined, heavy quiet of people who understood that standing was for later, when the world outside the theater asked them who they were. Anna came to my side. Her fingers were warm, mine were cold. We watched the screen together, black, finally honest. "We're live," she whispered. "Nationwide." I nodded. "Good." A phone buzzed in the press row. The reporter didn't answer. He was writing with both hands, head down, as if speed could make up for the years. Somewhere between the projector and the door, the metal and the film light had traded jobs. One would have to stop telling stories. The other would have to keep telling this one. I could still feel the heat on my cheek when we walked off. It wasn't a mark. It was a promise. By morning, the story had a pulse. The news crawl at the bottom of every screen thunked forward with that soft, rubbery tick you feel more than hear. Each new line dragged the air across my skin like static. Operation Valiant questioned. Cole documentary goes viral. Metal under review. I watched from my kitchen counter, palms flat on cold stone, as anchors practiced sorrow and congressmen practiced outrage. The apartment smelled like yesterday's coffee and printer ink. A stack of letters from veterans groups fanned under the window where the draft lifted their edges and made them rustle like leaves. My phone vibrated in a short, angry buzz. Unknown number, then another. Every voice that found me had the same timbre. Certainty searching for permission. Are you proud of yourself? Are you ashamed? Are you safe? I turned the ringer off and the room exhaled. By noon, the Medal of Honor office had issued a statement. The words were polished to a mirror and showed nothing but their own discipline. The award is suspended pending review. I printed it anyway. The paper was warm when it landed in my hand. Heat fades, the words didn't. Out on the sidewalk, I saw them. 2 protests, sharing concrete. Drums from the angry one thumped like a chest being pounded back to life. The other group stood silent, jacket zipped, signs steady. A woman in a faded field jacket held up a picture of a nameless village, photocopy grain rough under her fingers. She met my eyes and nodded once. Not approval, recognition. At the Cole estate, the air had the lemon-clean bite of a house that had been scrubbed to the bone for guests who weren't coming. My mother sat at the dining table with her hands wrapped around a porcelain cup, the teaspoon tapping the rim with a delicate, irregular rhythm. When she spoke, her voice came out as if it had been ironed. "He built our lives on ashes," she said, eyes on the tablecloth threads. "I was his alibi." She slid an envelope toward me. I felt the scratch of the paper seam under my thumb before I looked. Separation papers. Her signature was small, like a woman trying to take up as little space as possible in a story that had gotten too big. "I'm leaving," she said. I should have left the day the light changed in his study and never came back. I put my hand over hers. Cool skin, bones like twigs. "It isn't your shame," I said. She blinked and the teaspoon stopped moving. The inquiry came with the clip of hard shoes on tile and the fluorescent hum of 2 bright rooms. Government buildings all smell the same when they have made a decision. Toner, floor wax, and a hint of old paper. A staffer in a navy suit handed me a folded sheet. "Prepared remarks?" he asked, as if a pre-approved sentence could hold what the film had already cut open. I only have one line, I said. The hearing chamber wasn't grand like the theater. It was intimate in the way of rooms where consequences get written down. The microphones gave off that faint, woolly hiss that makes any voice sound older. When the chair recognized me, the flash of cameras from the press benches stuttered in waves, small bursts of artificial noon. I stood. The wooden rail under my fingertips was smooth from decades of hands. In the gallery, Anna sat beside Colonel Everett. He held his cap in his lap, thumb stroking the brim like it was a worry stone. 2 rows behind them, a young woman held up a photograph of a field I knew by coordinates, but not by name. Dr. Cole, the chair said, do you have a statement? I kept my eyes level. It was easier to balance the truth if I didn't try to carry their faces with it. Patriotism without accountability is just theater, I said. The sentence landed with the quiet weight of a tool in a drawer where it finally fits. A murmur rippled the room. Papers shifting, a cough, the creak of a bench when someone leaned forward to hear what came after. I didn't give them more. The microphones hummed and then settled, like a body deciding to sleep. After, in the corridor, the echo tried to pull me apart. Reporters' questions, phones chiming, shoes striking marble with a hollow chapel-like ring. I let it all pass. Anna caught up to me and touched my sleeve. The tug was small, grounding. They're suspending the medal, she said. Officially. And there's a note in the report on the citation language. Ward, I said. She nodded. They named her. We stood by a window that was too tall for the room. Light came down in white sheets, flattening everything it touched. In it, I could see dust motes turning and the ghost of my reflection, me without the edges. He won't come, I said. Not sure if I meant the inquiry or the reckoning. He already did, Anna said, glancing toward the door where a knot of officers had paused, their voices dropping as they saw me. He came by letting it be seen. That night, the city lay under a thin rain. Streetlights turned it into strings of beads that slid down the glass. I opened the window and let the wet air touch my throat. It tasted like pennies and cut stone. Somewhere below, someone shouted a name. Somewhere else, a siren wound itself down like a lullaby that had run out of notes. The Veterans Charity posted a statement at dawn. My mother's name was on it, this time alone. We honor service by telling the truth about what it costs. The comments flared and died and flared again. I stopped reading when they began to metabolize the story into team colors. Light can be a scalpel, it can also be a stadium. A knock sounded at my door, 2 quick, 1 slow. I knew the rhythm. Everett. He stepped in, hat in hand, rain dotting his shoulders like a new rank. He set a small object on my table, a ribbon bar, its colors dulled, the pin bent. Ward, he said simply. I picked it up. The metal was cold, edges biting through the callus on my thumb. I felt the point catch and held it anyway. We'll take it to Arlington, I said. He nodded. Tell her line out loud. My father disappeared from the public square. No more briefings, no more banquet halls. The houses my mother staged for the charity started to look like museums. In a photo that floated across my screen for a second before it was pulled, his metal case sat open on a mantel without the metal in it. The empty velvet looked like a mouth. Anna sent 1 text before I shut my phone for the day. You're trending in 3 languages. I turned off the screen. The apartment sighed into its own sounds. The old radiator clicking, a neighbor's laugh coming muffled through the wall, the rain drum-fingering the sill. My hands flexed without a thing in them and found, out of habit, the shape of a microphone that wasn't there. I let them rest flat again. I didn't need the instrument. The line had already gone where it needed to go. That evening, I stood alone in the theater we had bought out for a second showing. Empty seats. The projector purring to itself like an animal asleep. I stepped into the beam and closed my eyes. Warmth settled over my face. In the light, the inside of my eyelids went gold. I could feel, not see, the dust moving. Film light had crowned him for years. Now it had done its other job. It had revealed. I spoke into the empty room. Quiet, clean. You built your honor on silence. I said to the light that had always been his ally. I rebuilt it on truth. The shutter kept spinning. Outside, I heard a door open and close. The soft, sure sound of a world switching scenes. The ethics committee room had a different temperature than the inquiry, warmer, as if the cameras themselves gave off heat. The soft red tally lights blinked alive one by one, tiny coals along the back wall. I felt the desk's lacquer under my fingertips, slick, cool, like the surface of a lake you're about to cut with a dive you can't take back. A producer in a charcoal suit leaned in, breath peppermint and hurry. 30 seconds. Direct to camera on the chair's question. Then your line. He tapped the mic once. The little thump bloomed in the speakers and died. I looked past him to the second row. Veterans had taken the seats the lobbyists usually warmed. A woman in dress blues, Ward's unit patch ghosted on a faded jacket draped across her lap, held herself very still. In the far corner, the screen showed live feeds from overflow rooms, crowds packed tight, film light washing their faces into a single pale, attentive shape. The chair cleared her throat. Paper rasped. Dr. Cole, you've shown us how a medal can be misused as cover. What does honor look like when the film light is honest? The question hung, a clean square in the air. I could hear the room's quiet sounds stacking. A pen cap clicking back into place, a shoe shifting against carpet, the air vent's low, steady breath. I felt the mic's mesh under my knuckles. A faint grit, reassuring as friction. Honor, I said, keeping my voice level, survives the light. No preface, no throat clearing. Just the thing I came to say. I let the silence widen, then stepped into it. You built your honor on silence, I said, and felt the line seat in the room like a beam. I rebuilt it on truth. The sentence didn't need echo. It carried its own. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. The camera tally lights held steady. Somewhere behind me, a staffer's bracelet slid, tiny chime, and stopped. Then the veterans rose, one, then two, then a row at a time. The sound of jackets brushing fabric and knees finding their lock. A stand that started as decision and became reflex. The chair's pen slipped from her fingers and hit the blotter with a muted tick. In the corner screen, the overflow rooms followed. Dozens, then hundreds, people in winter coats and work shirts and dress uniforms, all standing, not to cheer, but to hold the line in place with their bodies. No applause, just the weight of height. Ward's old ribbon bar sat on the table beside my notes, its colors dulled. I set my palm over it, a cool bite of metal through paper, then slid it forward into the light in case anyone at home needed a geometry lesson. Here's what gets pinned when the story is told right. Off to my left, Colonel Everett drew a breath that sounded like it had been waiting 15 years to exit his chest. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The room was speaking for him now. Through the studio glass, the producer lifted both hands and held them at shoulder height. Half warning, half benediction. Somewhere in my pocket, my phone buzzed twice. I didn't reach for it. The mic's low hum felt like a living thing against the wood, steadying my pulse into its frequency. The chair leaned toward her mic. Careful, soft. On the record, she said, voice threaded with that tremor people get when they realize their paperwork is about to become history. Sergeant Helen Ward's objection to the strike will be entered as part of the case file. The committee acknowledges the plagiarized language in General Cole's citation and refers it for immediate correction. Across the room, a veteran in a campaign hat closed his eyes and tilted his chin up, exactly as if the sun had just come through a cloud onto his face. I breathed in. The room smelled faintly of hot dust and old carpet. The same palette as every stage I'd ever watched my father command, only gentler, as if the air itself had decided to ease off the performance. I glanced at the back wall where the feeds stacked. Overflow rooms, a foyer, a bar somewhere with the TV turned up too loud, and saw people placing their hands over their hearts without looking to see who else had done it first. Dr. Cole, the chair said, one more question. Her voice remembered formalities even as it stepped around them. What do we do with heroes when their light fails? I didn't look at the camera. I looked at the ribbon bar, at the veterans, at the second row where the woman with Ward's patch now had both hands planted on her knees, steady as a brace. We move the light, I said. The tally lights blinked off one by one. The microphones clicked down to their soft, woolly after noise. The room exhaled. A staffer in the corner started to clap once and stopped himself, palms hovering midair, caught between reflex and respect. As the hearing adjourned, people didn't sit. They lifted coats and bags still standing. An exit conducted at the height Truth had asked for. The woman with the patch stepped into the aisle and met me at the rail. Up close, I saw where the threads had frayed. She set 2 fingers on the ribbon bar and nodded, the smallest bow to a thing that had finally found the right lapel. "Arlington?" she said. "Arlington," I said. In the hallway, Anna pressed a palm to the center of my back, a warm square that anchored me between shoulder blades. "We need to get you to the press line," she murmured. "Just a second." My hands were shaking now that the mic no longer had permission to steady them. I let them find the edge of the folder and feel the cardstocks bite until they remembered the task: carry, place, repeat. A staffer hustled over with a single printed sheet, the ink still warm, the corners already curling from speed. Committee referral, citation review, Ward, Helen, Cole, Richard. I traced the capital letters with my thumb. The toner smudged faintly, a black whisper onto my skin. We stepped into the marble corridor. It magnified footsteps into a chapel rhythm. Reporters' voices rose, then thinned as they saw my face and decided to keep the question marks out of their first breath. I saw beyond them a cluster of uniforms at parade rest. Not for me, not for the committee, but for the moment itself. Film light from a camera rig bled into the hallway, the same honest white that had burned away the theater's darkness the night before. It found me and did its work. I didn't speak into the scrum. I lifted the sheet instead, let the camera iris tighten on the names, and let the small smudge of toner on my thumb testify that the thing existed off-screen, too. A young officer with a bar still bright from its first polishing caught my eye and, without thinking, came to attention. His boot heel kissed marble. The sound was clean. When we pushed through the glass doors into winter, the air slapped my mouth open. Cold has its own mercy. It forces you to breathe. Out on the steps, people had waited, hats wet with sleet, signs stowed, hands in pockets. As we emerged, a murmur rolled them, then calmed. No chant, no swarm. Just that collective decision again, the slow lift from seat to stance, rewritten for a wide sky. They rose, street-level stand. Across the plaza, a jumbotron replayed the line already. The captioner kept up. "You built your honor on silence, I rebuilt it on truth." Seeing it typed in block white at the bottom of the broadcast made it feel like sandblasted text on stone, a thing that would outlast us. I felt the cold through my coat now, a clean ache in the bones of my forearms. I tucked the folder closer, the edges digging a little into my ribs, relief in a geometry you can count on. Anna leaned close. "We can go," she said. "Not yet," I said. We waited until the jumbotron cut to the chair's referral line and then to a map of the cemetery. The camera tightened on 2 rectangles of turf. They looked like punctuation marks. "Tomorrow," I said, half to Anna, half to the woman in blues who had followed us out, and now stood at the bottom of the steps with her hand flat on the rail. "We take Ward home." The sleet thickened. The plaza lights haloed every flake for an instant, then let it fall. I closed my eyes and listened. No chant, no drum, just the quiet machinery of a city adjusting itself by degrees to a new alignment. When I opened them, the film light from the door behind me threw my shadow long across the steps. It slid down and stopped at the boots of the people standing there, a seam they didn't cross, a line they didn't need to. We had moved the light. Tomorrow would tell us where to place the stone. Arlington was all hush and marble breath. The gravel under my shoes made a soft, steady crunch, metronome steps between white stones. Cold light poured down the hill without warmth, the kind of winter brightness that paired everything to its edges. I kept the ribbon bar in my pocket, the metal cooling the crease of my palm with a precise little bite every time I tightened my fist. We stopped at the nameless grave, the one the map marked with a number that had never learned the shape of a name. The air smelled like wet grass and copper. Sleek gray birds hopped in the distance, their feet ticking lightly on stone. I took out the note I'd written on the kitchen counter before dawn. The paper rasped when I unfolded it. "I'm sorry it took so long." My voice didn't carry. It didn't need to. The wind read it for me and moved on. The woman from Ward's unit stood to my left, gloved hand on the rail. Ooh. Colonel Everett stood to my right, hat tucked beneath his arm. He cleared his throat once, the smallest sound, respectful, like a man asking permission to breathe. I laid the ribbon bar on the grass. The damp bled into my skin through the wool of my glove as I pressed it flat. Metal against earth. Evidence where the story had ended before it was written. I felt the ground's cold climb into my fingers and hold. "Do you want to say it?" the woman asked. I nodded. The words had waited in the top of my throat for days. "Sergeant Helen Ward objected to the strike," I said. The statement steadied as I spoke it. "She tried to stop it. No one listened. We will now." A gust came down from the ridge and rattled the wreaths. Somewhere behind us, a bugle sounded rehearsal notes. Thin, tentative, then clear. I closed my eyes and saw film light instead of sky. That pale, honest sheet that had burned through the theater and the committee room, that had finally refused to flatter the metal. We had moved it here. Everett's phone buzzed, a brief, apologetic shiver in the silence. He glanced at the screen, then passed it to me. A message from an address I recognized at once by the way it refused to compress words into anything less than their full names. They reopened the case. The truth stood. I handed the phone back. "Good," I said. It came out as breath, not triumph. We stood without speaking for a long minute. The kind of minute that stretches and thins until it becomes a seam you can step through. When I finally straightened, my knees clicked. Small, human sounds in a place designed to teach you how not to make any. On the way out, the sun broke the cloud cover for a second and laid a bright bar across the rows. It looked like a projector beam thrown sideways through air. Dust, no, sleet, caught in it and glittered, then fell. I touched the pocket where the folded note had been, as if to make sure its absence was doing its work. Driving back into the city, the wipers beat a soft, patient time against the glass. The Capitol dome rose through the drizzle like a familiar story you weren't sure you wanted to hear again. I parked and walked. The stone of the steps held the day's damp and sent it through the soles of my shoes into my bones. Up close, the bronze doors reflected me in blunt, dark smears. I rested my hand on the cool metal and felt my pulse climb into it, steady and low. "I didn't destroy his legacy," I said to the door, to the dome, to the thin light that had followed me from room to room. I freed it from the lie. A tour bus hissed by at the curb, brakes whispering. The wind shifted and brought me the mingled smell of wet wool, diesel, rain on stone. Somewhere behind me, a camera shutter clicked. One sound, then gone. I didn't turn. The light on the steps was already moving on, finding the next surface. That evening, I walked past the theater. The marquee bulbs ticked in their sockets, soft little electric heartbeats. Inside, the projector sat dark, lens cap on, a sleeping instrument that didn't need to do more work today. In the lobby, a poster of the film leaned on an easel, the gloss catching the vestibule's light and tossing it back without distortion. The space smelled like old velvet and fresh paint. At home, I set the black box on my desk and the borrowed metal case beside it. Two emblems side by side. One meant for light, one meant to survive it. I ran my fingertips over the microphone grill, cool, fine mesh, and then left it unplugged. The room was quiet enough to hear the radiator's slow tick and the city's distant, patient hum. My phone buzzed once on the table. "Anna, you okay?" "Yes," I wrote back. "We placed the ribbon. Then we did the work," she replied. I switched off the lamp. The window let in the soft, unambitious glow of the streetlights. In that untheatrical light, the desk, the boxes, the room looked exactly like what they were. No polish, no spotlight, just objects at rest in their right places. I lay down and listened to the building settle. The small occasional pings of heat moving through old pipes. The neighbor's laugh feathering through the wall, the elevator's cable sighing as it found its stop. Ordinary noises. Honest, undesigned. Sleep came without bargains. In the morning, I would teach my students how to read a citation like a ledger. I would show them where to find the footnotes that someone had tried to hide, how to hear a radio log and call it what it is. I would tell them, that patriotism is a verb you conjugate with witnesses, and when they ask me what to do with heroes who fail the light, I would show them the photograph of a small ribbon on wet grass. Truth outlived the broadcast. It outlived the speech. It would outlive us. Truth outlives glory. If you were ever told to protect a legacy with silence, remember, silence protects power, not truth. Subscribe for more first person reckonings where courage pays and dignity endures.